We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all must lend a hand. We can do it. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, your neighbor over there, a bit bewildered, but he cares.
Hello, I'm Thomas Gale. I'm a producer of Changing Our World. Welcome, and today we have our usual host, Linda Weltner, with us to tell us about her journey to Burma and what has happened since then. Linda, I'm so happy that you were able to be here today and tell us your story about the journey to Burma.
Well, it's pretty amazing to be there, so I'm glad to bring the stuff back.
Please tell us what inspired you and Jack to go to Burma, which is now called Myanmar.
Well, you know, they've just opened the country. So it has just been opened to tourism. And before that, you could only get a visa for one day. Burma is sort of the most isolated, one of the most isolated countries in the world. So they're opening to tourism. And Jack and I thought, well, let's go see what happens to a country before capitalism arrives. And we thought we'd never get another chance because, you know, all the big companies will be moving in, and we wanted to see what life looked like, maybe more than 100 years ago.
I understand the name is no longer Burma. Can you tell us why they changed the name?
Right. Well, the Burmese have this wonderful tradition, I like it, which is that, say some misfortune falls you and your family, and you're sick, and you recover, and you decide, well, the Nats, which are the Nats, they're the evil spirits, or mischievous spirits, they won't be able to find you if you change your name. So you might change your name to Mint Mint, which would mean rich, rich. And then you would maybe have better fortune. So this changing of names is very popular as a way to kind of avoid bad luck. And after the generals had massacred the students in the streets during a peaceful protest, they decided that it would be helpful if they changed the name. Then maybe nobody would remember that the crimes had happened there.
Wow.
But it isn't so unusual in that the name Burma had been given by the British. And just like we called it Beijing or Peking, isn't that? We called it Peking, the British did, and they changed it back to Beijing. So they took the name Burma and changed it back to Myanmar, which is what it was originally called. And Rangoon, which is a lovely name, became Yangon. So they returned maybe 100 towns that had been renamed by the British forces and gave them back. And then when they killed all the monks, they decided to move the capital. So they moved the capital out of Rangoon to a place called Naypyidaw, which means City of the Kings. And so now they felt that they were cloaked in the old traditional kingship rights and that they were on a new path.
We're in a setting here with temples behind us.
Yes, we are.
Can you
We're
tell
in a
us about
place called Bagan, which the Burmese believe in karma. And so the whole purpose of your life is to improve your next life when you are reincarnated by doing good deeds and contributing money and food to the monks and just in general being a good person. That's the path to a better life. And one of the things, they believe that whoever determines how you come back in your next reincarnation is to build pagodas. So we were to several places where there were 1,000 pagodas. And Bagan is an area, there used to be houses here, but they've all fallen apart because they were just made out of bamboo or straw. So this is where there are just hundreds and hundreds of temples. One interesting thing is the generals who have ruled with a brutal, bloody hand for the last 29 years wanted to fix it up. It's supposed to be eligible to be an international, whatever it is, sacred site, or you know, the UN gives these places a special status in the world. But they noticed that some of the tops had fallen off. So they got somebody to put cement tops on, the same kind of cement tops on all of them, whether they were 3rd century, 8th century, whatever. And actually, because they were a different color too, they sort of messed up the area, and the UN is withholding its approval. But anyway, it's still an amazing, amazing place.
You went there as a tourist.
Right.
However, you had something else in mind before you left.
I don't think you can go without a tour. There were, I have to say, someone my age, because there were a lot of kids in backpacks who didn't mind that almost nobody speaks English. And even those who do speak English, sometimes it's very hard to know what language they are speaking because they're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllables. So I personally wouldn't feel comfortable just landing there. And there are 2 kinds of tours. One uses all the government buildings. So you stay at fancy hotels, you eat in nice restaurants, all of which are owned by the generals, and the profit from them goes into the general's pocket. But we went with a tour that was out of Thailand, and the guy knew the country and had traveled there a lot. So we stayed in what's just starting now, private inns and restaurants run by individuals. And they're just getting the hang of it, because we went to one place and we sat there with all the food in front of us, which looked delicious, and the staff had forgotten to give us any silverware. And they had retreated because they didn't want to impose on us, or they were afraid we would speak to them. So we had to send someone to get them, to tell them we couldn't really eat these, what looked like Chinese dishes, like you just can't eat them with your hands. So there were a few little beginning things like that. The food was delicious. So we went with a tour guide, and he happened to be a person, he was married to a Thai woman, and he's a Buddhist, who had been very active in the villages. So in addition to the tour sites, we went to visit several very, very primitive villages where he was helping pay for certain of the more outstanding students in the elementary school there, which only went up to 3rd grade, to get further education. And so I got to hang out for 2 days and as if we didn't live there, but we got there early and stayed and got to get the feel for what it would be like to live in one of those villages. And there'll be some interesting photos.
Okay.
Oh, the question was,
yeah,
what other reason did I go there? Well, I teach at Explorers, which is the senior adult education program at Salem State. And so I knew I had a plan to learn. I read a couple of books before I went there, but I knew I wanted to really study it in depth and teach it. So I bought all kinds of clothing, because my style is to go in and do performance art, so that I am the person, that point of view. And so I came in as a history professor from the University of Yangon. I came in as one of the generals and defended my actions. I came in as a Padang guy, which is to give the indigenous perspective. I came in as Aung San Suu Kyi to tell what had happened to her. And I came in as a Buddhist monk with a bald head. And I had had some of the monks there teach me how to put on a Buddhist, whatever it's called, robe. And then I couldn't remember how to do it. So I pinned it in various strategic places to my underwear and crossed my fingers that the thing wouldn't fall off me.
What other places did you go to while you were there?
Well, there's a traditional trip now that you take. You go to Yangon, you go to Mandalay, you go to Bagan, which is fantastic, and you go to Inle Lake, which is remarkable. It's famous for its fishermen who paddle with their foot. They stand up in their boat, which is very steady, and they use this foot and arm. So I don't know if you can see my leg, but they've got it curled around the paddle, and then they fish with these big baskets because the lake is not very deep. And they see the fish and they put the basket down on top of it, and then they close it and they can haul the fish up. So we went to Inle Lake. But in addition, we went into some of the newly opened tribal areas. For a long time, visitors were only allowed in a small part of the country because there were wars with the indigenous people who were being repressed. And under the new government, because now they've moved, they actually had an election in 2010. And so they're loosening up the allowances for letting people in. They're loosening up the censorship of the newspapers. All that's only compared to what was before. And they've made peace treaties with a lot of the indigenous people. So we were able to go into one of the indigenous areas and meet the Pa'o people and go to a celebration at a temple. And one of the things we did is we stopped in a temple where the abbot had died, and his body was laid out there in the middle of the monastery. And they were building the funeral, I don't know what you would call it, like a platform that they were going to put him on, and they were building a casket from scratch, and they were decorating the whole thing with all kinds of beautiful colored papers, and then they were going to carry him into town and burn him. And one of the things that's part of the Buddhist practice is, like, for example, your abbot might give you a lotus blossom. And so you look at it, of course, it's a lovely, beautiful flower. And then as the days go by, it starts to wither. And so the idea is, oh no, now, oh, look how bad that is, look how horrible it looks. It's see the beauty in the withering, see the beauty in the dead flower. Accept that everything is impermanent. And in Cambodia, sometimes they give the monks dead bodies, and you just watch it, and you don't panic, and you say, oh, these are the stages of human beings. They go from fetus to child, to adult, to elder, to corpse. That's the natural progression. And just as you might like to see a child, here's the corpse. So we went in, and the kids were playing cards or laughing and joking, and here's this dead abbot with a couple of fans blowing on him because it's very hot there. And death is just a part of life. So that was really eye-opening. We couldn't stay and see him get burned.
Later in the program, we'll be talking to General Ne Win.
General Ne Win was raised in the most primitive town, typical of any that's outside the capital. No cars, no basic electricity perhaps, no running water, no TV reception, nothing. And the problem with the generals is, if they were well-intentioned, to try to unify the country and keep it, all these 135 different indigenous people live there, and they all want to be their own people, and it's very, very hard to figure out how to rule the country, especially because a lot of them live in very distant mountainous areas, and is that they had no education. They were not smart. So General Ne Win wanted to keep the country together, but he didn't really have much of an idea of how to do it. So he made a number of major mistakes, and under him, Burma went from being the rice supplier for the world to being among the most poor countries, the poorest countries in the world, under his rule.
What is happening now in Myanmar?
Well, what's happened is General Ne Win retired. It was partly changing the scenery after the death of the monks. The country was shocked beyond belief because the monks are held in such awe and such respect. And when the Cyclone Nargis came through, the monasteries took in all of the orphans of 150,000 dead parents and fed them. The people feed the monks who fed the children. And they are revered. And the idea that the government would shoot to kill and would go in and wreck monasteries and throw monks in jail shook the country to its core. So Ne Win retired, and a couple of other people came in. One of them was called the Butcher because he was the one who was charged of killing all the students in the earlier protests. So eventually someone came in who was sort of seen as just a pencil pusher. But in reality, he agreed to allow the elections to be held and to allow the people who got elected to take office. So it has now been liberalized to some extent. But the Constitution is such now that no one can run for president who's been married to a foreign person. So that was put in specifically by the generals to keep Aung San Suu Kyi, who had married an Englishman, from ever attaining the presidency of the country. So while she's in the parliament at the moment, she's pretty much helpless. And her job at this moment is to reassure the generals that if she ever took power, she wouldn't revenge herself upon them, because all the same people who kept her under house arrest in isolation for 15 years. And at any time, she could go home, but she knew they wouldn't let her back in. So she watched her husband die in England without her and didn't leave. She is now in office hoping that she can woo the generals into reversing that constitutional amendment so that she will be able to run in 2015.
Is Myanmar moving towards a democracy?
I have to say, I do not. This was one of the important things that I learned from studying Burma, is that you have to have some idea of democracy before you can have a democratic government. And Burma had been ruled for thousands of years by kings who had absolute power. And they did not have any idea of separation of power, because if you gave some of their power away, that would create other centers of power that would fight yours. So when a king got elected, he killed all his brothers and sisters and anyone else who might possibly want to ascend to the throne. The power was absolute. Then the British came in, and they ran it like a dictatorship. All you have to do is read 1984, which Orwell wrote, because he'd been in Burma as a British soldier. And then the Japanese came in, and they were worse than the Brits. And so when the generals took over, it was accepted that they wouldn't share power, that there could be no other centers where anything happened except from them. And information, too, was part of their control of power, so everything was censored. No foreign television, no foreign visitors, no tourism. You never questioned or spoke back. And the country has zero tradition of separation of powers. The generals were the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branch, as well as the media, the fourth estate. So I think they may liberalize, but I mean, it's a lesson to look back to the history of Afghanistan and Iraq and say, you know, has anyone in this country even got the concept of sharing power when running a country? And if they don't, it's a long road. And you can't expect to just impose it on a country as we have.
Well, thank you very much for coming, Linda.
Well, all right. I'll be back, or I won't be back, but I will send General Ne Win to talk to you.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce General Ne Win. Welcome, General.
Mingala ba. That is
Thank
hello in Burmese.
Hello. Please tell us about what has been going on in Myanmar.
Well, let me say that many people think that Aung San Suu Kyi is the natural leader of her country because her father was the father of Burmese independence and fought both against the British and against the Japanese to gain independence for Burma. But do you know that I was one of his 30 comrades? Do you know that I went to Japan with him to train to fight the British? Do you know that I was the person that he trusted to help head the army that he founded? He is the father. Aung San is the father of our army as well. And I believe I am the absolutely only person with the right to step into his shoes. After all, if some housewife from England showed up with a degree in government and literature from Oxford, who had never been any more than a writer and a mother of 2 sons, and laid claim to leading Myanmar, do you think anyone would even have looked in her direction? No. It is only because she is her father's daughter and that she never goes anywhere or appears in public without a picture of her father behind her right shoulder that anyone even gives her the time of day. And she has used that, though, all the time that she was away, studying in England, marrying a foreigner. She did nothing for her country. I, in the meantime, saw what happened after Aung San was murdered by a member of an opposing party. We don't really understand political parties as well as you do. The idea is you shoot your opponent was quite common in the times of the kings, and many people still believe in that method of settling political disputes. So he was murdered, and we had a democracy, and it was chaos, total chaos. The man who ran it, who knew, didn't have the strength, and in fact, things got so bad that he asked me and the army to take over the government for a limited amount of time. We took it over for 16 months. We suppressed the indigenous uprisings all around the country. People thought he was too weak, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. And we put the country back on its feet, and we allowed there to be an election. Well, who was elected? Who knew? Same man, same weakling who could not keep the country together. And we waited almost 2 years before I saw that the country was going downhill again. And he was talking about a form of government in which the tribes could be somewhat independent. We have 135 tribes, and we can't have 135 sub-countries within Burma. And so we went into action and took over and ruled the country for 29 years. People never mentioned that we had peace, and that the country did well, that we had built a new capital, that we built roads, that we instituted a series of marketplaces where food was low priced so that everyone could eat. Now, the fact that the soldiers who were under me took that food from the farmers and sold it on the black market, so that although there were these stores, there was very little food in them, cannot be blamed upon the leader. I mean, I never met any of those soldiers. I'm at the top, and you can't blame the president for everything. My idea was good, that we would have a socialist type government where everything would be owned by the government, and that everything would be made available to the people. Worked out as well as it could, given the nature of the Burmese people.
After the election in 2010, what happened to you?
Well, unfortunately, I resigned back in '98, I believe it was. My memory is going because I'm getting older now. And I was put under house arrest. I don't know, it doesn't seem right, but they had to maintain face, and they put me under house arrest. And then they put my daughter and her husband under house arrest for, well, they claimed embezzlement of funds. So I never expected the new president, whose name who remembers? They all sound the same. I hired him. He never said a word to me. He never said anything about the way that I ran my government, but now he's changed things. You know, we had an election back a while, and Aung San Suu Kyi and her followers won 90% of the votes. But I knew she couldn't rule. I knew she would just completely destroy the country, disrupt us. So we put her under house arrest and we annulled the election. But he had the election, and they got 43 seats in the parliament. You know, we have a rule now. In order to change the Constitution or make an amendment or do mostly anything, you need a 75% positive vote in the parliament. And we have a rule that more than 25% of the seats have to go to the military. So the military still is in control of any changes in the country. And we need to be strong. We need to keep this country from breaking apart under the various pressures.
General, tell me, how does Aung San Suu Kyi feel about what's going on now?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask her.
General Ne Win, thank you for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today, and I hope that there are more stories to come.
Well, I like adventure travel, so we'll see where our next destination is.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
The problems can all be solved with dedication and a little resolve. Obstacles slowly dissolve when we all just get involved. We can do it. Yes, we can. We can change things throughout the land. But we all